David Chen stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips as he stared in disbelief at the scene unfolding in his backyard. The pristine swimming pool he had spent his life savings on, the centerpiece of the modest suburban oasis he had created, was now occupied by strangers. Not just any strangers, but the Williamses from 3 doors down, complete with their matching designer swimwear, monogram towels, and a floating cooler filled with seltzers. "What the hell?" David muttered, nearly spilling his coffee as he rushed to the sliding glass door. He had lived in Sycamore Estates for 5 years, maintaining cordial but distant relationships with his neighbors. That was until Marcus Williams had been elected HOA president 3 months ago. The Williamses had moved in last year, immediately distinguishing themselves with their perfect lawn, luxury vehicles, and habit of referring to their previous home as "our place in Huntington Beach" at every opportunity. Marcus, a corporate attorney with slicked-back hair and perpetually white teeth, had campaigned for HOA president on a platform of elevating community standards, which apparently meant tripling everyone's fees. Now, as David stepped onto his patio, he watched in astonishment as Mrs. Williams adjusted her oversized sun hat, while Mr. Williams executed a casual backstroke across the length of David's pool. "Excuse me," David called out, attempting to keep his voice level. "Can I help you with something?" Marcus Williams lifted his designer sunglasses and flashed his trademark smile. "David, good morning. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is, and I'm wondering why you're swimming in my pool on this beautiful day." Mrs. Williams, Jennifer, tittered nervously from her lounge chair, which David noted had also been brought from their home and placed on his pool deck. "Oh, David," Marcus said with an uncomfortable chuckle. "Didn't you read the new HOA bulletin? It was distributed last week." David crossed his arms. "What bulletin?" Marcus climbed the pool ladder with practiced grace, water cascading off his athletic frame. "The one about the new Community Resource Sharing Initiative, Section 3, Paragraph 4. He reached for a towel. "Is that monogram too?" and dried his face. "All significant amenities are now available for use by HOA board members at designated times for community welfare assessment." David blinked. "You made a rule that lets you use my private pool?" "Not just me," Marcus corrected, pointing a manicured finger. "The entire board. Though admittedly, that's just me, Jennifer, and the Petroskas. Gore in Cancun this month." He smiled again. "We're assessing your pool's compliance with the new safety standards. Purely official business." "My pool was inspected by the county last month," David said, his patience wearing thin. "I have the certification." Jennifer spoke up, her voice syrupy sweet. "County standards are the bare minimum, David. Our HOA aims higher." She sipped her drink. "For example, your water features aren't operating. That's a violation of Aesthetic Maintenance Code 7B. The waterfall broke last week. The part is on order." "And your pool temperature?" Marcus asked, sliding his feet into leather sandals. "Regulations specify 82 degrees for optimal community enjoyment." "Community enjoyment?" David echoed. "This is my private property." Marcus plucked a document from his bag, laminated of course, and handed it to David. "Actually, according to the covenant you signed when you moved in, certain aspects of your property are subject to community standards and access provisions. We've simply activated those provisions." David scanned the document, his blood pressure rising with each paragraph of legalese. There it was, buried in subsection 12D. Board members could indeed access private amenities for assessment purposes, with reasonable notice. "I never received any notice," David said. "We sent an email," Jennifer said, finally standing and gathering her belongings. "Not our fault if you don't check your spam folder. We're scheduled for Tuesdays and Fridays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The Petroskas might take Mondays when they return." As the Williamses made their unhurried exit through his side gate, which they had apparently accessed using the master key that only board members possessed, David stood motionless on his patio, the laminated rules still clutched in his hand. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, watching as Jennifer paused to criticize the placement of his garden gnome before disappearing from view. That night, as David researched HOA laws until his eyes burned, a plan began to form. If Marcus Williams thought he could take over his pool with bureaucratic maneuvering, he was about to learn that David Chen had some tricks of his own, and they involved making his beautiful pool look like the last place anyone would want to swim. David Chen was not a confrontational man by nature. In his 15 years as a chemical engineer, he had built a reputation as a problem solver who could find elegant solutions to complex challenges. Now, as he sat surrounded by HOA bylaws and chemical formulation guides in his home office, he realized this situation called for exactly that kind of creativity. "They want to inspect my pool," he muttered to himself, clicking through pages of non-toxic chemical compounds on his laptop. "Then I'll give them something to inspect." His research had confirmed what he suspected. While the HOA covenant did indeed contain the provision Marcus had mentioned, it also contained clear language about safety standards. Any pool deemed potentially hazardous would be restricted from community use until remediation was complete. David smiled as he highlighted that section with a fluorescent yellow marker. The next morning, David called in sick to work, something he hadn't done in 3 years. This operation required precision timing, as the Williamses weren't scheduled to return until Friday, giving him 3 full days to implement his plan. His first stop was the hardware store, where he loaded his cart with industrial-grade waterproof LED strip lights, a programmable controller, and several rechargeable battery packs. The teenage cashier raised an eyebrow at his purchases. Science project, David explained with a conspiratorial wink. Next came the specialty chemical supply store, where he had placed an order the previous night. The clerk brought out a box containing several unmarked bottles. "You sure you know what you're doing with this stuff?" the clerk asked skeptically. "I'm a chemical engineer," David replied, showing his professional ID card. "These are all non-toxic, food-grade compounds. I just need specific optical properties for a demonstration." Back home, David spent the afternoon carefully measuring and mixing his chemical cocktail. The formula was simple but brilliant: a combination of fluorescing sodium, quinine sulfate, and food-grade phosphorescent powder, all completely harmless substances that, when added to water under the right lighting conditions, would create a spectacular glow effect. By evening, he had wired waterproof LED ultraviolet lights along the bottom edge of his pool, carefully concealing them beneath the decorative tile. The programmable controller was hidden in a fake rock near the filter system, allowing him to activate the lights remotely from his smartphone. "Let's test this out," he murmured, dimming his patio lights as the sun set. David tapped his phone screen, and instantly, the hidden UV lights activated. The chemical mixture he had carefully added to the pool water began to react, transforming the crystal-clear water into an eerie, glowing green liquid that pulsated slightly with the gentle movement of the water. The effect was simultaneously beautiful and unsettling, exactly what he had hoped for. But the visual effect was only part of the plan. From his garage, David retrieved several hazard signs he had printed and laminated earlier that day. Warning: chemical balancing in progress, read one. Caution: do not enter water, declared another. He positioned these prominently around the pool area. The piece de resistance came from his days working on industrial sites, an authentic-looking radiation hazard symbol mounted on a stake at the pool's edge, accompanied by an official-looking document in a waterproof holder that contained chemical jargon incomprehensible to anyone without a degree in the field. For his final touch, David set up a small weather-resistant speaker system disguised within his poolside plants. He had programmed it to emit an occasional low mechanical beeping sound, the kind people associated with Geiger counters in movies. As David stood back to admire his handiwork in the gathering darkness, the pool glowed an unearthly green, occasionally pulsing brighter as the programmed lights changed intensity. The beeping sounds added an ominous atmosphere, and the warning signs gleamed in the reflected light from the water. "Perfect," he said, taking photos with his phone for documentation. That night, David slept better than he had in weeks. He set his alarm early, wanting to be fully prepared when the Williamses arrived for their scheduled inspection. Before going to bed, he sent a carefully worded email to the entire HOA board. "Dear board members, I'm experiencing some unexpected issues with my pool's chemical balance following routine maintenance. While I work with specialists to resolve the situation, please be advised that the pool will be closed for health and safety reasons until further notice. I've posted appropriate warnings as required by county regulations. Sincerely, David Chen." He made sure to copy the county health department's general email address in the correspondence, creating an official record of his responsible notification. Friday morning arrived with perfect weather, sunny, warm, and not a cloud in the sky. David had been up since dawn, making final adjustments to his setup. He added another dose of the fluorescent solution to maintain the pool's otherworldly glow, checked that all the UV lights were functioning, and verified that his security cameras were recording. Then he brewed a pot of coffee, grabbed his laptop, and settled into a chair on his screened porch, which offered a perfect view of the backyard while keeping him mostly hidden from sight. At precisely 9:58 a.m., right on schedule, David heard the telltale sound of the side gate latch being lifted. He smiled to himself and activated the enhanced setting on his phone. Immediately, the pool's glow intensified and the beeping from the hidden speakers increased in frequency. Marcus Williams stepped into the backyard first, already dressed in swim trunks with a towel slung casually over his shoulder. Jennifer followed close behind, carrying what appeared to be a new inflatable float still in its packaging. Both froze mid-stride as they took in the scene before them. "What the hell?" Marcus exclaimed, his confident demeanor faltering as he stared at the pulsating green water. Jennifer clutched her husband's arm. "Marcus, what's that beeping sound?" David watched with satisfaction as Marcus approached the pool cautiously, bending to read the warning signs David had placed around the perimeter. When he reached the radiation hazard symbol, Marcus physically recoiled. "This has to be some kind of joke," Marcus declared, of his voice lacked conviction. "I don't think it is," Jennifer replied, pointing to the official-looking document in a waterproof holder. "Look at this." Marcus snatched the document and began reading. David had filled it with authentic chemical terminology, phrases like elevated levels of phosphorescent particulate matter and potential contamination from underground source, interspersed with just enough recognizable words to sound alarming without being specific enough to identify as a hoax. "Did you get my email?" David called out casually as he stepped from the porch into the yard carrying his coffee mug. He was wearing work boots, jeans, and a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a deliberately more professional appearance than his usual weekend attire. Marcus and Jennifer both jumped at his voice. "What email? What's going on here?" Marcus demanded, his face flushed. "I sent an email to the entire board yesterday about the pool situation," David explained calmly. "Health and safety concerns. I've had to close it temporarily." "What exactly is wrong with it?" Jennifer asked, taking several steps back from the water's edge. David adopted his most serious professional expression. "Well, I'm not entirely sure yet. The specialist from the environmental assessment company is coming on Monday. Something about the groundwater table and potential seepage." He approached the pool and looked thoughtfully at the glowing water. "The luminescence wasn't this pronounced yesterday. That's concerning." The beeping sound increased again, right on cue thanks to the timer David had programmed. "Is that a Geiger counter?" Marcus asked, his voice noticeably higher than usual. "Oh, that." David glanced at the hidden speaker. "Standard monitoring equipment. The company dropped it off yesterday for baseline readings." "Is it radioactive?" Jennifer whispered, now standing nearly at the gate. David looked appropriately concerned. "I wouldn't use that term without confirmation. Let's just say there are anomalies that require professional assessment." He paused deliberately. "I'm sure it's fine for brief exposure, though I personally wouldn't submerge in it until we get the all clear." Marcus was no longer looking at the pool, but instead staring intently at the document in his hands. "This mentions potential liability for property owners who knowingly allow access to contaminated water features." "Yes, that's standard language," David replied with a shrug. "That's why I sent the notification email and posted all these warnings. Can't be too careful with safety protocols." Jennifer tugged at Marcus' arm. "We should go." "Absolutely," David agreed readily. "I wouldn't want either of you exposed unnecessarily. In fact, I've been thinking of staying with my sister until this is resolved." Marcus narrowed his eyes, his attorney instincts finally kicking in. "This seems very sudden." The pool was fine on Tuesday. By Monday afternoon, David's contaminated pool had become the talk of Sycamore Estates. He first noticed it when Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly woman from across the street, stopped him as he collected his mail. "Is it true?" she asked in a hushed tone. "About the radiation in your backyard?" David maintained his concerned expression. "There's definitely something unusual happening with the water. Specialists are investigating." Word spread quickly after that. David observed neighbors taking detours on their evening walks to pass by his house, next craning to catch a glimpse over his fence. Several residents called to express their concerns about the neighborhood's water table. David reassured each caller that the situation appeared to be isolated to his property, while being careful never to explicitly mention radiation. The most interesting development came Tuesday evening when David's doorbell rang. He opened it to find Raj Sharma, a quiet man who lived at the end of the street and who, David recalled, had been the only person to run against Marcus for the HOA presidency. "I heard about your pool," Raj said without preamble, "and I also heard some other things you might find interesting." David invited him in, and over cups of tea, Raj revealed that the Williamses had been systematically abusing their HOA authority. They had been using several neighbors' amenities, and not just David's pool, but also the Johnsons' tennis court and the Garcia's outdoor kitchen, all under the guise of community welfare assessment. "Marcus has also been selectively enforcing rules," Raj explained. "The Petersons got fined for their fence height, but Jennifer's sister moved in 3 houses down and had the exact same fence with no issues." "That doesn't surprise me," David replied, "but why is everyone putting up with it?" "Marcus is a lawyer and he intimidates people," Raj shrugged. "Plus, most folks here are too busy to attend the HOA meetings where these decisions happen." As Raj was leaving, he paused at the door. "By the way, I am a friend at the county environmental office. If anyone actually calls to check on your pool situation, he'll let me know." David smiled. "I appreciate that." On Wednesday, David received a formal letter from the HOA board, essentially just Marcus and Jennifer, demanding an independent inspection of his pool. The letter cited concerns about property values and community safety, with a thinly veiled threat about potential legal action if David didn't comply. David responded with his own carefully crafted email, copying all homeowners in the association. In response to the HOA's request for an independent inspection, I already arranged for 3 separate agencies to evaluate the situation. Representatives from the County Environmental Services, State Water Quality Division, and a private environmental assessment firm will be conducting tests over the next few weeks. In the interest of transparency, I've attached their preliminary findings report and my full communication history regarding this issue. The attachments included David's correspondence with actual environmental testing companies, from whom he had requested information but not services, along with a professional-looking preliminary assessment document he had created, filled with enough technical jargon to be impressive yet vague enough to avoid any specific claims about radiation. By Thursday evening, David noticed a shift in the neighborhood dynamics. 2 neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now wave enthusiastically from across the street. Another stopped to chat and casually mentioned that an emergency HOA meeting had been called for Saturday morning. There's talk of revisiting some of the recent rule changes, his neighbor confided, and possibly even a new board election. That night, David received a text from Raj. The Williamses visited 3 different urgent care centers for radiation exposure testing. My friend at County Health is very confused by their insistence that they've been exposed to a radioactive swimming pool. David smiled as he replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. Friday morning, 1 week after the Williamses had fled from his contaminated pool, David was enjoying his coffee when his doorbell rang. He opened it to find Marcus Williams standing there alone, his usual polished appearance somewhat diminished. His hair wasn't perfectly styled and faint shadows hung beneath his eyes. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his voice lacking its usual authority. David stepped aside to let him in. "Coffee." Marcus declined with a quick head shake as he took a seat at the kitchen table. He glanced nervously toward the backyard, visible through the sliding glass door where the pool still glowed its eerie green. "I've been doing some research," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully, "about water luminescence and chemical reactions." Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a palpable sense of anticipation. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the community clubhouse, a modest building that typically hosted holiday parties and the occasional yoga class. By 9:30, the parking lot was nearly full, with more residents arriving by the minute. David arrived early, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and carrying a folder containing printouts of all of his documentation. Raj met him at the entrance. "I've never seen this many people at an HOA meeting," Raj whispered as they entered. "Usually it's just the board and maybe 3 other homeowners." Inside, the small meeting room was buzzing with conversation. Nearly 60 residents had packed themselves into the space, filling every chair and standing along the walls. David noted that many were clutching copies of the HOA bylaws and recent rule changes. In the front row, the Johnsons and Garcias, whose tennis court and outdoor kitchen had also been commandeered by the Williamses, sat with determined expressions. At precisely 10 a.m., Marcus and Jennifer entered, momentarily faltering at the sight of the packed room. Marcus quickly composed himself, straightening his tie as he made his way to the front table. Jennifer followed, her usual confident smile now tight and forced. "Good morning," Marcus began, tapping the microphone. "I see we have quite a turnout today. As you know, this emergency meeting was called to address concerns about." "Point of order," called out Mrs. Peterson, a retired school principal. "According to bylaw procedure, we need to approve the agenda before proceeding." Marcus blinked. The agenda was distributed. "We'd like to propose an amended agenda," Mrs. Peterson continued, standing and distributing copies of a document, with the addition of 2 items, review of recent rule changes and board election procedures. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I second the motion," called Mr. Garcia. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. All in favor of the amended agenda? A forest of hands shot up, leaving Marcus no choice but to proceed with the revised plan. The meeting quickly became a referendum on the Williams administration. One by one, homeowners stood to voice their grievances, arbitrary enforcement of rules, lack of transparency in decision-making, and of course, the Community Resource Sharing Initiative that had allowed board members special access to private property. When it was David's turn to speak, he kept his comments measured and factual. "I'm here today not just because of my pool situation, which many of you have heard about, but because I believe in fair and transparent governance. When I found strangers using my private property without proper notice or consent, I was concerned. When I discovered this was happening to other homeowners as well, I became alarmed." David opened his folder and projected several images on the screen, showing the documentation he had compiled over the past 2 weeks. The current board has instituted rules that primarily benefit its members rather than the community as a whole. This isn't what an HOA is supposed to be. The crowd erupted in applause when he finished speaking. Marcus attempted to regain control, citing legal precedents and HOA regulations, but his usual confidence was clearly shaken. When Jennifer tried to defend their actions as standard practice in upscale communities, several residents audibly scoffed. The turning point came when Raj revealed the results of his investigation into the HOA finances. Using his background in accounting, he had discovered that the tripled fees had gone not just to community improvements as claimed, but also to an administrative discretionary fund that had paid for the Williams' trip to a leadership conference in Maui. "I move and behold an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board," called out Mr. Johnson to enthusiastic agreement from the room. What followed was a procedural battle as Marcus attempted to cite bylaws requiring advance notice for leadership votes. But the residents had come prepared. Mrs. Peterson produced the original HOA charter, which allowed for emergency leadership changes with a 2/3 majority vote in extraordinary circumstances. The vote was 56-3 in favor of removing the current board. By noon, Sycamore Estates had a new interim HOA board consisting of Raj as president, Mrs. Peterson as vice president, and 3 other longtime residents as general members. Their first official act was to resign the Community Resource Sharing Initiative, and all other rules passed under the Williams administration. As the meeting concluded, residents approached David to express their gratitude and, in many cases, their amusement at his creative solution to the pool problem. "Did you really make it look radioactive?" asked Mr. Garcia with a grin.